When you hear Spanish Civil War, you probably picture a pretty straightforward conflict. But what if I told you it was something way, way more complex? That hidden inside that brutal war was this radical social experiment, a revolution that tried to remake an entire country, right from the ground up. Let's dig into this hidden history.
And that is the core idea right there. The Spanish Revolution wasn't some separate event that happened before or after the war. No, it exploded right in the middle of it. As the country was fracturing, ordinary people didn't just fight to defend the government. They fought to create a completely new world, one controlled by them.
So, to really get a handle on this, we're going to break it all down. We'll start with how the revolution even ignited. Then we'll look at the deep divisions that were tearing Spain apart. We'll see how the world got involved, uncover the tragic infighting that doomed the Republic, and finally, watch the rise of a dictator.
Okay, so first up, how on earth does a military coup accidentally kick off a social revolution? Well, it happens when the coup doesn't quite succeed. It shatters the old power structures and leaves this massive vacuum.
What's just wild here is the speed and the scale of this. With the government basically gone, it was workers' organizations that stepped up to fill the void. In places like Catalonia, the powerful anarchist union, the CNT, didn't wait around for permission. Nope, they just took control of everything. Factories, trains, farms, you name it, and started running it all themselves, collectively. This was the revolution happening in real time.
But an explosion like this doesn't just come from nowhere. Spain in the 1930s was a nation stretched to its absolute breaking point by these deep, bitter divisions. It was a total powder keg, just waiting for a spark.
And this just lays out the two Spains perfectly. On one side, you've got all the forces of change, workers in the cities, poor farmers, and a whole bunch of left-leaning groups who wanted a modern, secular country. And on the other side, the old guard, the monarchy, the church, the army, the wealthy elites, all of whom saw those changes as a direct threat to their entire way of life. There really was no middle ground.
And the thing is, this all happened so fast. In 1931, Spain becomes a democracy and starts making big changes. Land reform, separating church and state. The traditionalists, they freak out. By 1936, a group of generals, led by Francisco Franco, decides they've had enough and they launch a coup. But it doesn't work everywhere, and instead of a quick takeover, Spain is just torn in two.
Now, this conflict was never going to stay a purely Spanish affair. The huge ideological battles of the 1930s, we're talking fascism versus communism, democracy versus authoritarianism, they all saw Spain as the new battleground.
This chart just makes the stakes crystal clear. Franco's nationalists got massive direct military support from Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. The Republic, on the other hand, got help from the Soviet Union, but that came with some serious strings attached. And then you have the incredible story of the international brigades, just volunteers from all over the world who showed up to fight against fascism. And this is a really chilling piece of the puzzle. For Hitler, Spain wasn't just about helping out a buddy. It was a live-fire training exercise. The German Condor Legion practiced dive bombing, tank assaults. They were perfecting the exact blitzkrieg tactics that would steamroll across Europe just a few years later.
So where were the great democracies in all this? Well, they chose a policy of non-intervention, which basically meant they refused to sell weapons to the legally elected government. But what that really meant was that the Republic was starved for weapons, while Germany and Italy just kept pouring resources into Franco's war machine. Their neutrality definitely picked a side. This brings us to the tragic, absolute heart of why the Republican side failed. While the nationalists were unified and armed to the teeth, the Republicans were fighting a war on two fronts, one against Franco and another against themselves.
I mean, just look at the contrast here. It's night and day. The nationalists had one simple, brutal goal: win. That's it. But the Republican side was this messy coalition of competing ideas. It was this huge fundamental argument. Do we put the social revolution on pause to win the military war first, like the Soviet-backed communists wanted? Or is the revolution the entire reason we're fighting, like the anarchists believed? That disagreement, it would turn out to be fatal.
In those early days, though, passion was their most powerful weapon. No pasarán, they shall not pass. That was the rallying cry during the heroic defense of Madrid. It was this moment when ordinary people actually stopped Franco's army cold, and it really seemed like anything was possible.
But as you can see here, that initial unity, it started to crack. After the revolution kicks off in 36, the foreign intervention ramps up. But the critical turning point, the real gut punch,
comes in 1937, when the different Republican factions literally start shooting at each other in the streets of Barcelona.
This was literally a civil war inside the Civil War. At its heart, it was an ideological clash. The Communists, backed by the Soviets, wanted to create a centralized state and a disciplined conventional army. For them, winning the war came first. But for the anarchists, that was a betrayal of the whole point. Their goal was a society without a state, and their militias were the revolution in action. These two visions just could not coexist, and their violent clash just destroyed morale and shattered any hope of a united front.
And so, with its enemies unified, and its own side literally tearing itself apart, the Republic's fate was pretty much sealed. The end of the war wasn't a peace treaty, it was a conquest. On April 1st, 1939, it was all over. After nearly 3 years of the most brutal fighting, General Franco announced his total victory. The Democratic Republic was crushed, and that dream of a worker-run society was just extinguished.
And what replaced it wasn't a return to the old Spain. It was something new and terrifying. Franco established a fascist dictatorship that would hold Spain in an iron grip for the next 36 years, right up until his death in 1975. An entire generation would grow up without knowing freedom. The human cost, it's just staggering. 500,000 lives. And that's not just soldiers in combat. That's civilians killed in massacres, in bombings like Guernica, and from starvation and disease. It's a devastating toll.
And even when the fighting stopped, the killing didn't. What followed was a systematic campaign of revenge called the White Terror. Hundreds of thousands of people who had supported the Republic were rounded up. They were imprisoned, sent to labor camps, or just executed. The goal was to wipe out any trace of opposition.
And this is exactly why the Spanish Civil War still matters so much to all of us. It's often called the dress rehearsal for World War II. And why? Because it was the first big showdown between fascism and its opponents. And, well, fascism won.
So this leaves us with a really tough question, doesn't it? Spain proved that the Western democracies were not willing to stand up to fascism. And you have to wonder, what was the real price of looking the other way? The answer, tragically, would come just 5 months later, with the invasion of Poland.